Okay, I think we will wait a few more minutes because we are still missing some of our presenters. So I saw Philip and Luis in the earlier session, so they should also come to our sessions, I hope. Okay, they haven't shown up so far, but I suggest we should start and let's hope they will join us later. So welcome everybody to this session on green energy policies in the global south. We have planned 5 presentations. Maybe it will be only 4 presentations since one speaker didn't reply whether he would really participate today. But yes, so we have definitely 4 presentations, and we have 20 minutes of presentation for each of you, and then followed by 10 minutes from the discussant and 5 minutes for questions and answers. And I will tell you, or I will show you in the camera a sign when 5 minutes are left for your presentation and another for 1 minute left. And yes. Okay, so let's start with our first presentation. That's Lam. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Can everyone see my slide?
Yes, we can see it.
Perfect. So hello everyone, my name is Lam from Fulbright University, Vietnam, and it is an honor for me to present my recent work on residential electricity efficiency and implications for Vietnam's clean energy transition. This is our content of today's presentation. And first, I would like to talk a little bit about the Vietnam power sector, but focusing on the demand side. So Vietnam is one of the most electrified countries in the world. By 2023, almost all parts of Vietnam have been electrified, including remote islands or isolated region in the mountains. We are doing well in electrification, but we are not doing very good in managing our electricity consumption. So that's why our consumption growth is higher than economic growth. So just to be more specific, our consumption growth is about 10%. Meanwhile, the economic growth stands at around 5%. And for some common indicators to assess the efficiency, like the elasticity or the intensity, these indicators for Vietnam are relatively high. So this is the figure show the elasticities of Vietnam, China, and India. As you can see here, the figure for Vietnam is higher than the other two countries, even though Vietnam is less developed than China. And we have the similar GDP per capita to India. And then this figure shows the electricity intensity. So Vietnam is also higher than the remaining countries, even though we don't really have the severe winter. So heating is not a common thing in Vietnam. On other hand, other countries like Japan and South Korea, the heating is really a thing because of the cold weather. Um, if we break down the consumption by the sectors, the industry and construction sector consumes the most electricity, but it makes sense because this sector is viewed as one of the pillar to the economic growth in Vietnam. And state and residential sector comes as the second. This it takes around 30% of the total consumption. And the demand from the residential sector mostly correlate with the improvement in household income and living status. And nowadays, appliances like fridges becomes almost universal, and ACs become more popular in urban areas to deal with the hotter weather in summer. This is the map show the percentage of households owning air conditioners or fridges in Vietnam divided by provinces. And because of all the discussions above, it is important to understand the current state of the electricity efficiency in Vietnam. So in this research, we aim to answer two questions. The first question is to measure the level of efficiency using an econometric framework. And then the second purpose is to discuss some efforts about the energy efficiency and conservation done by the Vietnamese government. Moving on to the econometric modeling. First, I would like to talk a little bit about the electricity demand function, but Vietnam follows the increasing block rate pricing, which means that the marginal price within an interval block stay the same, but if the consumers consume more than that and moving on to the next block, they will face the higher marginal price. And normally for the usual demand function, we will have the quantity is on the left-hand side, and then the price is on the right-hand side, so that we have the problem of endogeneity arises because of the simultaneous problems between the quantity and the price. But here, because we focus on the consumption at the equilibrium, we use the reduced form so that we don't have the endogenous rise in the model, so we can get rid of the endogeneity problem. To measure the efficiency, we expand our usual demand function to apply the stochastic frontier concept. So that this approach was applied in previous studies. And this is our estimation model, as you can see here, compared to the standard demand function. The only difference here is that in the error term, now it becomes the composite errors with comprises of the VI is the random error and the UI is the inefficiency. So following this equation 2, we have the technical efficiency can be shown in equation 3. About the data source, we use the Vietnam Household Living Standard Survey. So this survey is common when doing research about Vietnam under the household level. So this survey is collected biannually by the Vietnamese General Statistics Office, and it collects a lot of information about living standards such as household demographics or access to healthcare and so on. And one special feature about this survey is that it has a rotating panel design. So which means that around 50% of the current household that are interviewed in the current round will be interviewed in the next round. So to be more specific, this is the illustration of the rotating panel design in this survey. So suppose that we have around 100 households in the 2014 round. So in the next round, we will have around 50 households that already interviewed. And then in the 2018 round, we will have around 25 households that appear in 3 rounds, and around 25 households appear in the 2016 and 2018 rounds, and then the remaining households are newly interviewed. In this study, we use 3 rounds of survey. We exclude the 2012 backwards because the information about electricity consumption in these surveys are inefficient for us to conduct the analysis. We also exclude the 2020 and 2022 because we don't want to have some potential risk caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. And in our study, we only consider households living in their own houses and use the national grid for lighting because these households follow the official tariff, which is the increasing block rate pricing. Households living in rented accommodation, they will follow the tariff regulated by their landlord. So it's quite different from the official one. But I think this group is still a good representation of the total sample because it accounts for around 96% of the total. Again, this is our estimation model. And on the left-hand side is our dependent variable. So it is the electricity consumption in the last month of survey. Because we don't have the data on the quantity, so that we have to extrapolate this information using the electricity bills of each household. This is the tariff in Vietnam in 3 years of our interest. And about the independent variables, we follow very standard choice of variables in the standard demand function. The only note here is that about the temperature, we extract the data from the MODIS radiometer, which is attached on the Terra satellite to get more frequent and more accurate information on the temperature. And this is the map illustrate the mean temperature in Q4 2018 in Vietnam, divided by 6 economic regions of Vietnam. And to ensure the robustness, we conduct several regressions. So we have the pooled regressions when we treat its observation as independent households. So in pooled regression, we assume 2 types of distributions of the inefficiency. The first one is the half normal, and then the second one is the truncated. We also divide our total sample into sub-samples by regions and by areas. And we also set up a panel data for our analysis. So in balanced panel data, we only consider households that appear in 3 rounds of survey. And we also have the unbalanced data when we have the full sample. And in each case, we examine the time invariant situation. It is like when the efficiency does not allow to change over time. But in the next case, which is the time variant decay, we allow the inefficiency to change over years. And so our estimation shows that on average, the electricity efficiency in Vietnam is around 75%. And it is highest in the Red River Delta, which is the most prosperous region, and lowest in the Northern Midland and Mountainous region, which is also the poorest area. And efficiency in urban is a little bit higher than rural region. This is our estimation tables. And after we get the level of efficiency, we want to go one step further so that we explore the determinants of the inefficiency. So this determination can be modeled as in the equation 5. And because we don't have enough data, so we can only use the equipment age as a proxy for the equipment quality. And even though we have 2 models here, the first model is to measure the inefficiency, and then the second model is to explore the determinants of the inefficiency. We only we estimate these 2 models into one single stage using the frontier truncated model. And our estimation shows that equipment age do have impact on the inefficient. In particular, the age of switches, ACs, and electric fans aggravates the inefficiency. And so we already had answered the first question, which is the level of efficiency in the residential sector in Vietnam. Next, we move on to discussing some of the energy efficiency and conservation efforts from the government. And Vietnam had already had a law on energy efficiency and conservation. And we also published 3 Vietnam National Energy Efficiency Programs, which are the action plans. In these plans, we have outlined all the targets for about the energy efficiency for all sectors in Vietnam and some actions to implement to achieve the targets. And we have some big achievements. And I think one of the most successful program in Vietnam is the labeling program. So, so from 2008 and after 15 years, we are able to mandate the labeling on most of the common household appliances, such as ACs or fans or TVs or LED bulbs and water heaters. And in line with it, the government also banned manufacturing and imported appliances whose efficiency is lower than our national standards. And incandescent light bulbs with a capacity greater than 60 watts is also strictly prohibited from importing. And talking a little bit about the supply side, thanks to the favorable feed-in tariff scheme, we have nearly 100,000 systems or over 9 gigawatts of home solar panels have been installed, which contribute significantly to our electricity supply side. And there are some shortcomings that should be addressed and can be improved over time. And I think one of the recommendation that we can show is to encourage replacing old equipment. our estimation shows that equipment age do have an impact on the efficiency, so that the government could establish some subsidy programs or encouragement scheme to support households, especially poor households in rural area, to replace their old equipment with the new one and more efficient appliances. The second recommendation is that there is a reform in retail tariff should be conducted, because currently the retail electricity price in Vietnam is among the lowest in Southeast Asia, and there are previous studies show that the elasticity of demand in Vietnam is almost unitary. So the government can use the price as the tool to manage the demand side, and they can come up with some new tariffs, such as the time of use or the season pricing. And then the last recommendation is that the cooperation among key stakeholders in Vietnam regarding the energy efficiency should be stronger. For example, at the moment, the Ministry of Industry and Trade is in charge of the energy efficiency and other issues related to the energy sector. Meanwhile, the Ministry of Natural Resources and the Environment, MONRE, is responsible for any issues related to the environment. Unfortunately, these two ministries do not work well together to set up a clear pathway to achieve environmental policies by some adaptation in the energy sector, which is unfortunate because the energy sector is one of the main sector that can be addressed to tackle the environmental issues. So I think the collaboration between key stakeholders and even between the government, the private sector, and the public sector is very important in tackling not only the energy efficiency, but also other problems that we have in the energy, energy and environmental topics. So this is the end of our presentation. Thank you for your listening, and I look forward to receiving comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lau. And now we have the discussant for you, Laura. Right,
Yes.
you're already here. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you all hear me well? Yes.
Yes, we do.
Excellent. Thank you, Lam, for this presentation, and I appreciate having the opportunity to read this paper. This is a very well-written paper, very well published. And for somebody who was not familiar with the electricity sector in Vietnam, it was highly informative. The paper starts with a very good description of the power sector in Vietnam. It documents that Vietnam has had 3 decades of high economic growth, and that electrification has very good coverage for a country in this level of income. But the problem seems to be on efficiency. And as the way I understand it, this means that too much energy is being wasted. And the paper focuses on residential consumption and analyzes some of the policies that have been in place by the government to deal with efficiency. And the paper is a very good is a good example of when economic theory and an empirical analysis can serve to provide sound policy recommendations. So the paper focuses on some market solutions, such as tariffs prices need to be increased. One of the main conclusions of the paper is that prices are way too low. That leads to inefficiency. The paper also discusses non-market solutions, including like labeling, providing information to consumers, and some institutional solutions, such as working with the institutions that are in charge of the energy sector, some coordination. So a very complete paper. And now here are some of my questions. First, I would like to understand better how you defined efficiency. What is efficiency and what is inefficiency? And beyond the definition, the paper provides that a number. So the number of is 75% inefficiency in the electricity market. To me, that doesn't seem tremendously low. Like 75%, is it 75% efficient or 75% inefficient? If it is 75% efficient, is that low? What is the benchmark compared to other countries? I would like to know. And the third question is, why is inefficiency a problem in the first place? Is it that there is a shortage in supply? Like, what is the motivation for increasing efficiency in Vietnam? My fourth question is there a way to identify heterogeneity in inefficiency? The paper provides some heterogeneity analysis by rural and urban areas and spatial heterogeneity, but I'm thinking more about household level heterogeneity. Is it that poor households are the ones who have older equipment, older appliances, and hence they're the ones who are more inefficient? And if so, this has policy implications as well as maybe more market solutions, such as subsidies or incentives for those households who are particularly budget constrained to change the equipment and increase the efficiency overall. So those are my comments and questions, and I will leave some time and space for other people in the audience to comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura. Do you want to reply directly, Lam, to one of these questions?
Yeah, sure. So thank you for your comments. They are very informative for me. About the first question, the definition of efficiency here. This is the technical efficiency. So it's like with the level of appliances that the households use, they should have reached their optimal output, or they should have the minimum electricity consumption, but instead they don't reach that optimal output. So this is the way that we calculate the efficiency. So it's like the distance between the current level of output to the optimal output. And for your second question is about 75% efficiency. I know that this number is relatively high, but I think we still have around 25 inefficiency to solve. And I think we can, even though we have relatively high efficiency, there are rooms for us to improve the situation. And I think our recommendations are contemporary in the way that these issues are some major issues in Vietnam, and it's especially about the retail tariff, because like the price in Vietnam is heavily regulated. So it's always keep low so that to subsidize a wide range of vulnerable groups in Vietnam. But it also poses a very serious concern about conservation, because it's too low so that people tend to don't have the motivation to save more electricity. And then And then for the last question about the heterogeneity, to be honest, we don't really address this in our paper. I think in standard demand function, they don't usually address this one. And because our model is an extension of the standard function, so that we tend to skip this one, and we try to treat that all households enjoy the same estimates. Yeah, so that's my responses.
Very much. We also have two questions here in the chat. The first one is from Philip, and it's also about the definition, what efficiency means in your study. I think you already responded a bit to that. And then he also asked, how do you address unobserved heterogeneity, as this could bias your estimates of the efficiency scores? And what requirements were put in place to ensure the frontier is correctly estimated? As you know, this has implications on the efficiency model. And since we don't have so much time left, I also add the other question from Rafia. And as I understand, the question is, she's asking how the two parts of your paper relate to each other. So the conclusions, the recommendations on energy conservation efforts, is this an outcome of your research, or is it the long-run achievement led by other programs? Maybe you can choose on one of the two questions to respond to them, and then the other ones you could maybe respond in the chat afterwards.
Yeah, sure. So I will respond as quickly. So I think these two parts of my paper is quite distinct in the way that we first measure the current level of efficiency, and then for the second part, we mainly focus on the policy institution current stage of Vietnam, when we view what they have done good so far and what they have improved so far. So that's our intention. And then I think for your question, I think these achievements achieved by another program rather than our estimation and our research. And I think for the last question, you're asking about whether the customers are postpaid or prepaid their electricity bill. Is it correct? But I think if I understand it correctly, they are postpaid customer for the electricity. So yeah, so that's all from my side.
Okay, thank you very much. So a warm round of applause for Lam and her presentation. Thank you very much. And we can then go directly to the next presentation, and it seems that Bright has not made it to our session today. So I would like to ask you, Laura, to directly start with your presentation.
With pleasure. Let me organize my screen. It's here. Put this over here. Can you see my slides now?
Yes, we do.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here and to present this paper, which is joint work with Jill Cavilla-Harris and Daniel Harris, also here at Salisbury University, and Elaine Frey from California State University, Fullerton. So this paper is about what happens when you provide households with electricity for the first to connection to the power grid for the first time in the context of rural households in the Brazilian Amazon. So yeah, this, not to repeat what Selina Profen said in her presentation flash talk this earlier this morning, but we know that a lot of people still lack access to electricity And there is the United Nations goal to connect these households is very ambitious, and it is estimated to be around $640 billion, as some of you in the audience know very well. The assumption is, of course, that rural electrification is fundamental to economic growth because it covers all aspects of human development, including income, education, and health. And of course, we wonder as economists, we wonder if this is a cost-effective way of reducing poverty. The literature is very thick, and it generally finds mixed results. So there are papers that find no results, some other papers that find positive and large effects of electrification on various outcomes. Just to cite two very recent papers, the one by Berlik and Preonas in India. They find limited economic impacts 3 to 5 years after the implementation of India's national electrification program. And the only RCT there is on the extension of the power grid is the work by Lee and colleagues in Kenya, and they also found no meaningful impacts on economic and non-economic outcomes 16 to 30 months after power connection. So the overall message of the literature is that welfare impacts of rural electrification are certainly not guaranteed, and that context matters. Electricity may be required, but not a sufficient condition for welfare development. That's kind of where the literature is at the moment. In this paper, we document a case in which electricity did contribute, in this case, to the expansion and consolidation of a new economic activity, which is milk production in rural areas in the Brazilian Amazon. So what we find is that households acquire more work appliances once they are connected to the grid, and that this capital acquisition allows them to double their milk income. Notably, the dairy industry was the most rapidly growing economic activity during our period of analysis, and we think that electricity contributed to that transition. For example, by extending the shelf life of dairy products. So to summarize the paper in a slide, what we use is detailed primary household data that one of my co-authors, Jill, collected. And she collected this data already in 1996, 2000, and 2005. She has subsequent rounds of data in 2009 and 2019. These are the years in which electrification happened. So she was in the field when she was in the field in 1995, not much electricity, not many households had access to electricity. By the time she went back in 2000, she started to notice that electrification was coming to town. So she started asking questions about this progressively in the subsequent rounds of household surveys. So we use Callaway and Santana's heterogeneity robust estimator for staggered treatment timing. And we think we contribute to the literature by adding evidence on the effect of power grid extension using primary data and non-experimental methods in the context of a low-density rural area of a middle-income country. So that's how we situate our paper within the literature. We think that in our case, in our context, baseline economic conditions enable households in these settlements to benefit from electricity. This is because they already had some basic infrastructure, roads infrastructure, and some incipient market were already happening in the region. So we think that the baseline level of economic development enabled electricity to be a booster in the dairy industry. So here's some context. This is our region of study. This is, here's a map. So this is Ouro Preto, which is part of the state of Rondônia in Brazil. So what happened is that this area was first populated in the 60s and 70s following a very large government settlement program. So basically they start telling people, if you come here, you will get land. So a lot of people, specifically from the southeast of Brazil, started to come to this region, attracted by this policy. So they were given land, about 100 hectares at the beginning of the settlement program. And the settlement program started with building roads. So first came roads, and it was a dynamic or systematic urban-rural settlement hierarchy. So the government developed this area following a very detailed spatial pattern. So they will build in the road, and as they built the road, they started developing the settlements, and they would continue, and then another settlements. And so rural areas are in between more urban centers. So a very hierarchical spatial deployment of the urbanization and settlements. A few years later, like 30 years later, they started providing electricity, and the rollout of the electrification followed the same spatial pattern. And something that's important to mention is that the connectivity to electricity was made free for everyone. So there is no selection in terms of who can afford access to electricity, because it was free for everyone. And what else do I want to say here? So yeah, they followed the other important thing to mention is that when settlers came, they could not choose the plot they were given. So they were assigned a plot of land upon arrival. So we think that, as I explain later, this kind of helps in our identification strategy. So here is how the electricity was rolled out. It follows the same spatial pattern. The first area to be electrified was the urban, like rural town over here, and then from there it expanded. And the last settlements to be electrified were the newest settlements over here. So we use a spatial model to predict exactly when was each part of this region electrified. The 2009 survey asked households, when did you get electricity for the first time? So we use this information, and for households for which we don't have the information on when they got electricity, then we use the spatial model to predict the timing of electrification. And we think we're very successful at establishing the year of electrification for each household. This is just a picture for context. This is how the area looks like. A very lots of pastures and some secondary roads over here, and here are the electricity grids. So this area is the size of the state of Delaware in the United States, so a fairly large rural area in the Amazon, Brazilian Amazon. So the outcomes come from the household surveys. So we have information on total income, which we break into milk income, beef income, crops income, and off-property income, and government payments. So these are all the components of total income. We asked how many electrical appliances they have, and we divide them into work and leisure appliances. So work appliances are going to be refrigerators, freezers, fans, washing machines, milk tanks. And leisure appliances are televisions, phones, and landline and cell phones. So the sample is representative spatially and demographically. About 2 to 7% of the rural population in any municipality and year were interviewed. We have an unbalanced panel of households that were not connected to the grid in 1990s, that did not have access to electricity in 1996. And from those we use, in the regressions, we use the ones that are for which we have peer balance information. So information for at least 2 consecutive years. The results are robust to using balanced panel, the subsample of households that remained in the panel throughout the entire period of analysis. So here are some descriptive statistics. So in 1996, no household was connected to the grid. By the year 2000, about half the households were already connected to the grid, and by 2005, 70% of the households were connected to the grid. That's why we don't include the subsequent rounds of household surveys, because then we don't have control households to include in the analysis, because most of them were already electrified. So this is total income. So they household have a mixed portfolio of activities. They do milk, they do beef, they do crops, and they do off-property income, in some government payments like pensions and cash transfers. So in 1996, the average household had less than one work appliance and less than one leisure appliance, and those numbers increased dramatically by 2005 to 3 and 1. About almost 4 work appliances per household on average. So our quasi-experiment is characterized by having multiple time periods, 1996, 2000, and 2005, units that are treated at different points in time, and a treatment with an absorbing state. Once a household gets electricity, it remains treated. So given this context, we think that Callaway and Santana's heterogeneity robust estimator for staggered treatment timing is appropriate. And we use not yet treated as control units. So those households that have not received electricity, but they will receive electricity, those are the control. That's going to be the counterfactual. We rely on bootstrapped standard errors for inference, given that we have a fairly small sample size. For identification, the key question here is the timing of electrification endogenous? We rely on evidence from the data, but also on like fieldwork experience information to justify this. Contextual information. So we don't observe systematic differences between treated and not yet treated at baseline. So households that get electricity first are similar to households that have not gotten electricity yet at baseline in 1996. And then, as I mentioned, land was allocated based on a first-come, first-based basis, so they could not choose the plots they were assigned. Electrification followed this patient pattern, so it's a matter of timing and depending on where you are within the region of study that defines when you get electricity. And market for land were not well developed at the time, and out-migration and abandonment of land were not common in this area and period. So not a lot of mobility. Households are pretty stable. In fact, our attrition rate is pretty small. Well, this table just summarizes that there is no systematic differences between treated and not yet treated at baseline. That's what this table is about. So here are the main results. So we find that electricity increased milk income by about 6,000 reais, which is virtually twice as much as they had on average at baseline. So they doubled their milk income. Total income, the point estimate is positive, but is also very uncertain. So we're underpowered to detect statistical significant differences on total income. We kind of see a little bit of the point estimate for off-property income is negative. So we think that households might have substituted some income coming from milk for some off-property income, but we cannot confirm it, given that this is also, we're underpowered to detect those differences as well. The work appliances increase, almost by like, I think it's like 2 power work appliances. Post in electrification and leisure appliances also increase. So this is the event study like plots that you get with the Callaway and Santana's estimator. We can see that milk income increased in both periods. Work appliances increased substantially, and then that leads to a milk income increase over the period of analysis. Leisure also increases. Instead, crops income does not change. Same goes for government payments, and maybe perhaps a negative effect on off-property income. So that's kind of the summary of the results. So we conclude that households in this large-scale settlement operation region in the Brazilian Amazon benefited from electricity. and that the baseline economic conditions is what enabled these households to make use of this electricity in a profitable way, in a productive way, as to increase their milk income. That's all I have for now. Yeah, I'm open and looking forward to your questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura, for this very interesting presentation. So unfortunately, we don't have a discussant now because Brian is not here. So I would want to open up the floor directly to questions from the audience. And we have one question from Rishabh. I will read it to you. In your literature review, did you find any relation between Amazonian electrification and deforestation in terms of the dairy industry? Or is deforestation more an outcome of the resettlement policies of the 1960s and 1970s? How can policymakers and local stakeholders ensure that welfare development takes non-extractive sustainable forms?
This is a fair question. So the effects of electrification on deforestation, completely different outcome, completely different paper, absolutely worth writing. I couldn't answer this question with results from our paper because we do not have deforestation as an outcome. What else can I say about that? I would say that deforestation happened after the construction of roads. So I wouldn't attribute it so much to electrification, although it could have played a role, given that the milk industry expanded after electrification. But I would say that if we have to find the culprit of deforestation, it would be roads. Not so much. Maybe electrification is a secondary effect, but the main would be construction of roads. But here I'm just giving an opinion based on what I've read and know, but definitely not a conclusion we can drive from our paper. But thank you for your question.
Thank you, Lara. Maybe I follow up with a question. So you see that the impacts of electrification is mainly due to income from the dairy industry, right? And you also see that work appliances increase among the households that get electricity. Do you have some more insight, like what kind of appliances are these that households adopt? And then also maybe related to this question to deforestation, do you have any indication of whether people become more productive because of electricity in the dairy industry, or do they also increase, for example, I don't know, number of cows, or is it just that they earn more from the activities they had been doing already in the past? I don't know whether you have anything on that in your data.
We don't look at productivity in this paper. It's hard to know exactly whether it is. So what we think is happening is that they get electricity and then they can store milk. When they can store milk, they can trade milk, because now it's not only for self-consumption and for, say, trading with your neighbor. Now you can store milk. They buy appliances such as refrigerators and milk tanks. So they start developing the dairy industry in a more sophisticated way, in which farmers bring their milk to a center that collects milk from various farmers, and then they process it, and maybe they start producing cheese and yogurt and other dairy products beyond milk, this was not possible before. They could actually store and give milk a longer shelf life. So that's kind of what we think is happening, is that electricity allows them to take this market to another level of sophistication. And then the market develops, and then it starts being profitable. So farmers sell more, and they make more income out of it. That's kind of the story we see behind these results.
Okay, and we have another question from Philip, which I think goes a bit into the same direction. Do you analyze the transmission mechanisms for these identified effects?
If you could clarify what you mean by transmission mechanism?
I imagine that Philip is also asking whether you can see like how these impacts materialize. So one transmission mechanism would be through these new appliances that you just mentioned. I think that's
Right.
what you mean, Philip, right? Or if not, just jump in and.
Yes, exactly. But yeah, the intermediate outcomes would be, so the chain, the theory of change would be electricity allows farmers to produce, to store milk, and that's where we see with the increase in appliances, work appliances, and that will allow them to produce more. And that's what we see in our data. So the intermediate outcome or the transmission mechanism would be acquisition of appliances, work appliances.
Laura, it's Jill here. You might also add that having electricity means that they can milk the cattle in earlier hours of the day and can milk cattle in the more productive, cooler part of the day. So that increases. Something as simple as adding a light to your barn can increase the amount that you can produce in any given day. Or at least maybe not you can produce the milk that you can actually harvest from the cows.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for this addition. And if I understand correctly, so this one transmission channel, you can identify it in the data, right? You know
Correct.
which appliances they have. Do you also have data like on workload and on time use of the households to, for example, look at this, whether they get up earlier, do they work at different points at the time?
Unfortunately, no, the surveys do not record time logs, time allocation, but we think that what we see from the data is that maybe they substitute some labor off farm. So, for example, going to the next rural or urban town to provide services, and they substitute some of that with in-farm milk activity. That's kind of what we see. That's what the data is suggesting, is kind of as a clue. We cannot completely confirm it, but we think that there might be a substitution, an income substitution effect that the data weekly detects, that we think might be part of the story.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think this speaks to the role that qualitative analysis can play, because we have qualitative evidence that the farmers are getting up early to milk the cow in the cooler part of the day from some follow-up surveys and focus groups. But I guess, yeah, Laura, we haven't really spoken to that in the paper itself, so maybe it'd be worth doing that. And yeah, maybe this is a general approach that economists should think about, using to analyze transmission mechanisms, is follow-up qualitative surveys instead of conjecture. It seems like there'd be a high value in that.
Yeah, okay. So if we don't have more questions, I would suggest we say thank you to Laura, and we move on to our next presentation, which is Philip. I think, Laura, you still have to stop sharing your screen, please. Great.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, we do. It's not in the presentation mode so far.
Okay.
Now it is.
Is it okay now?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so thank you. So today I'm going to speak on the issue of environmental taxes. As we all know, in trying to deal with negative externalities, countries are actually encouraged to institute some form of, carbon taxes or environmental taxes to deal with that. But there has always been this, issue of whether, such taxes would actually lead to welfare enhancing, or it would actually worsen the already developmental challenges that we experience, particularly for developing country cases. So in this study, I tried to answer that question, looking at it from a developing country perspective. I mean, as we all know, we currently experiencing significant market failures because of the issues of rising greenhouse gas emissions and also biodiversity loss. And anytime such market failures arise, what it means is that the private marginal cost now fails to actually represent the social marginal cost, and consequently leading to inefficient market allocations. And to deal with such market failures, one of the proposals has been to institute carbon prices, and what originally was termed as the Pigovian type of taxes, as these types of taxes have been identified to be effective in dealing with such negative externalities. But strangely, when you look around, it has not been very widely adopted. In fact, as at 2020, the total, 16% of global greenhouse gas emissions were subjected to carbon prices, and out of the 6% were regulated under carbon taxes, while the remaining was regulated under cap and trade schemes. Now, if you look at the transmission mechanism, the argument is that, carbon prices enhances efficiency, one, through the reduction of negative externalities or damages as related to production and consumption. Comparatively to, it's known to be very less distortive when correcting for negative externalities, and there's a revenue generation effect that is associated with that, what others call the recycling effect. Now, when you look at all these mechanisms, broadly, the literature captured this under the double dividend hypothesis, and the validity of such hypothesis currently remains a contentious issue, both in the theoretical and empirical studies. And if you look at the empirical studies, various aspects of this double dividend hypothesis have been explored. First, there are studies that looked at how environmental taxes actually perform the role of correcting negative externalities. So studies looked at how said taxes are impacting on carbon emissions, and there are studies also looking at how said taxes impact on incomes and economic growth, in general. And there's this recycling effect, which looks at some sort of a combination of the first two, where you are looking at environmental taxes performing the role of correcting the negative externalities, as well as promoting growth, and also some redistributional effect like employment creation and so on and so forth. And when you look at these branches, irrespective of which side that you looked at, the evidence is still not very conclusive, even when you look at comparable contexts. And then generally, most of these evidence emanate from using data from these developed economies, and rightly so, because this whole move, actually the implementation effectively started from such economies, and developing countries are trying to follow suit. And for us, it is interesting to actually look at the story of developing countries. I mean, for several reasons. In that contextual factors actually play an important role here when you are looking at how environmental taxes could impact on incomes or other welfare indicators, and the fact that different groups of people are likely to be impacted differently by environmental taxes because of the fact that our consumption behaviors actually differ. So if you compare the developed economy to those of the developing economy, what constitutes their consumption basket is quite different, and also even the availability and access to eco-friendly alternatives actually differ between these economies. So as an objective, basically, I try to look at the direct effect. So basically looking at the revenue or income enhancing effect of said taxes, and also looked at the indirect effect. So basically the indirect effect is saying that we could actually enhance income growth through such taxes, because said taxes actually mobilize intrinsic moral behavior to reduce emissions and external damage, which in the long term should improve our environmental sustainability and our sustainability goals. And for developing country context, particularly this indirect effect is very important. In that if you look at our consumption basket, there's a high preference for low carbon technologies because there's a high preference for the high carbon intensive technologies because of the steep cost nature of the low carbon technology, and because of that there's a clear deterrence in terms of the amount of investment that we are making in green technologies. So in this study we use panel data. It's a cross-country data that consists of 71 countries, specifically coming from Africa, the Asian region, and Latin America. So by way of method, I start with a more traditional way of analyzing mediation effect, which is the product rule by Barron and Kenny, and then later I move on to do a causal mediation analysis. So equation one is more like our outcome equation, where our O is, say, our income measure, and equation two is our mediation model. So there are different requirements for mediation as captured in the literature, and I try to go for the more general one. Other authors have actually suggested a more restrictive type of condition. So basically, for us to have mediation, the first condition is that our independent variable here, which is the measure of tax here, without all other factors, should command its own effect on income, and then when you include the mediating variable, which in this case we are looking at the emission, carbon emission, the inclusion of it should actually reduce the size of the effect of the tax. And the third is that this mediator should also have its own influence on the outcome. Now, when you come to the mediator model, the final condition is that the tax variable here should actually have an important influence on the mediator. So in the second approach, what I try to do is that I try to create a cross sectional data from the panel data, and I do that by kind of creating like a cross-sectional, averages, and then use that in my causal mediation analysis, where I try to define some potential, outcomes. So here, my potential outcome one is the outcome that we observe if a country were to be exposed to the treatment, and then the outcome 0 is if the country were exposed to the control. Later, I would specify the thresholds for the definition of the treatment and the controls. And in observational data sense, we know that such potential outcomes are likely not to be independent of the treatment assignment, and for which reason we may need to impose some conditional independence assumptions. And again, to the mediator, which in this case is carbon dioxide emission, is also likely not to be independent of the treatment. And for that reason, we can also define another set of potential outcomes, which here outcome 1, which we are calling EM of 1, is what we observe. That is the mediator value that we observe for the treated group, and the outcome 0 is the mediator value we observe for the control group. So with that, we can then say that our potential outcome can be defined as a function of both the treatment and the mediator. So for example, our outcome as a function of the treatment and the mediator here means that this potential outcome or result if the treatment variable takes on the value T, and if the mediator value takes on the value, N. So with this, we could actually estimate the total average treatment effect, which is when the difference between the treatment and the control. Now, we could actually decompose this average treatment into the direct and indirect. So equation 4 shows us the average indirect treatment effect. And here, clearly what you could see is that we keep the treatment fixed, and then we just switch on the mediator from the mediator value that would otherwise have been observed under the treatment to the one that would have been observed under the control. In the case of the direct treatment effect, here what we do is that we fix the mediator value, and then we switch on between the treatment values, basically. Okay. So for our identification concern, obviously this requires that for causal mediation, we require that we satisfy the sequential ignorability assumption, which basically says two things: that the potential outcome and the mediator are not independent, conditioned on the fact that we control for some pre-treatment covariate. We don't use randomized trial here, but even if you were to do that, you are less likely to be successful in dealing completely with this sequential ignorability assumption. And in such circumstances, you may want to impose other restrictions, such as the interaction between the mediator and the treatment. For us, we rely on controlling for confounding factors. So 3 of them. So the treatment and then the outcome confounders, the treatment mediator, and then the outcome mediator, confounders, to command some kind of causal. And in defining our treatment, the treatment variable is actually a continuous data, and therefore I rely on the intensity, the variation in the intensity. So for the baseline, we define our treatment scenarios as the maximum tax and then the mean tax, and compare that with the minimum, environment. So more like regimes. So if countries were subjected to maximum environmental tax regime compared to countries that are subjected to minimum tax regime. I mean, what is the difference in the outcome that we observe? And then, I mean, subsequently, I standardized the treatment variable so that the mean becomes 0 and the standard deviation becomes 1. And then I looked at countries that are exposed to environmental tax that can be described as +1 standard deviation above the mean versus -1 standard deviation. And then we do the same for +or -1 and +or -2 standard deviation compared to the mean. And then finally, we compare the 75th percentile to the 25th percentile. So in the more basic results, so if we were to estimate equation 1, I mean, separately, clearly what you see, maybe we just pay attention particularly to model 2 and 3, because in model 2, we include the mediator. And as I said, the inclusion of the mediator should reduce the direct effect of the treatment, in this case, the tax. And clearly you see that the inclusion of that reduces that. So that satisfies 2 or 3 of the requirements that we expect. And then if we look at the mediator, I mean, variable, clearly here we could confirm that, I mean, taxes command some negative influence on carbon dioxide. In other words, I mean, raising said taxes could be successful in reducing, negative externalities. And then to estimate the indirect effect, as I said, I use the traditional causal mediation, and as suggested by Sobel and Arian and all that. And all that, I mean, they clearly indicate some significant mediation. In other words, income increasing due to the reducing effect of emission through taxes. And even though the values are quite marginal, but it says that there's some kind of story, I mean, there. And then obviously with set panel times, I mean, series data, our causality, you want it to be strong. So here we want to expect that, I mean, every time that there is a tax increase, that is actually accompanied by an increase in income. So we try to run this different time horizon regression to be sure that, I mean, consistently, I mean, positive increases in taxes correspond with positive increases in income. And except for the period 1998 and 2002, thereafter, you see that consistently the effect has been, I mean, positive. And then we use a panel fixed effect, difference in difference, where we adjust for some covariates. And clearly here, again here, our treatment, we rely, because the continuous variable, we rely on the intensity level. And we see that for the full sample, the effect is positive, to say that by marginally, increasing such taxes, we should expect the impact on income to be positive. And when we do the regional disaggregation, you can see that all effects are positive, but I mean, it's relatively high in the Asian and not significant in both Asian and Latin America. And this might be speaking to the heterogeneities that may be coming from these, I mean, contexts, particularly if you look at the Asian region. I mean, they've been very aggressive in instituting some, assertive, redistributive, I mean, policies, and there have been evidence to suggest that, I mean, economic growth have actually, transformed, I mean, livelihoods by, lifting a lot of people, I mean, out of poverty and all that. Okay, so now, like, I move on to the causal mediation one, where I try to derive the cross-sectional, data from the panel. And for model 1, here the treatment, as you could see, is the maximum tax, versus the minimum. And I think I'm having something blocking my view of my first figure. Is there a way to take off the stop? Because I see stop sharing and it's blocking my first figure, so I can't see properly. Is it the same with you? Hello?
I think we can see I can see. Oh.
Okay, I have your screen stop, and I think it's blocking anyway. So, but the
Maybe
most
also
important.
one remark. So we are already running out of time.
Okay.
Maybe you can take
Sure.
a few more minutes and wrap up.
Okay, sure. So, if you look at the, average, treatment effect, basically you would see that countries that, in other words, the difference between, the outcome between the treated and the control group is actually positive. Suggesting that, movement from, lower tax regime to, higher tax regime positively actually impact on our incomes. And we find significant, this total effect, we find that a large part of this total effect of tax is coming from the indirect component, which is the emission, reduction. And beneath, you could see that if you look at the mean tax versus the minimum, the extent of mediation is about 62% And in model 3, we define other potential outcomes where we make all the sample exposed to the treated vis-a-vis if they were exposed to the control, and we looked at other cross possible outcomes. And the treatment effect plot clearly shows the distinction that moving to higher tax regimes clearly increases the value of income. And in this case, clearly we see that a large part of the total average treatment effect is coming from the indirect treatment effect. We did some robustness check, defining different sort of control and treatment scenario, and the results generally seems very consistent to that. So in our conclusion, we find evidence that the effect of environmental taxes is actually positive, but obviously there might be some regional heterogeneities, which obviously may be speaking to the varying effectiveness of redistribution system and the political and economic conditions of the country, which implies that when we are instituting such taxes, they need to be complemented with other efforts to be able to harness the overall effect. And we again find that tax have positive direct and also negative indirect. In other words, increasing income and reducing emission, which some way support the double dividend hypothesis. And this is very informative, because then basically what it is saying is that with environmental taxes, we can actually reduce the tension between economic growth and environmental sustainability in developing countries. And lastly, like I said, we find significant mediation effect in terms of the role that taxes can play in reducing carbon emissions, which obviously means that such taxes need to be tied to specific environmental conditions. We should not just implement it for its implementation sake. If they are not tied to such conditions, then we might not harness the overall impact that we expect. Okay, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Philip.
Yeah.
And then, Luis, the floor is yours for your comments.
Should I stop sharing?
Yes, I guess.
Okay.
I actually going to share slides are really simple, just like I'm used to do slide sharings when I do discussions, but yeah, hopefully it's useful. So I'm going to discuss the paper that Philip just finished presenting, and it's a really interesting paper. First of all, I want to make it clear I am a macro labor type of economist, so I'm more used to search and matching friction models and things like that. So the econometrics is not my forte. Nonetheless, it was really interesting and really nice. I mean, I wanted to start, motivating a little bit. We know that the relationship between GDP and CO2 emissions, everybody knows about the Cosnet curve here. Probably I don't need to refresh it, but I mean, we know, like, for example, until now, GDP and CO2 emissions by regions, there are some regions that have decoupled their growth from CO2 emissions. Then there are regions such as the ones in the middle, China, India, Africa, and Latin America, that they are starting to diverge. And regions which it was surprising to me that Southeast Asia was the one in the Asian countries was one that presented high results for Philip, because they still have a really coupled GDP and CO2 emissions. Here, this graph I was expecting in the paper, and I missed it in some sense. It's like, which are the countries that are treated? Which are the countries that have a carbon tax or some sort of emission tax? And I don't know which country. So let me jump to this paper. This paper, as Philip presented, studied the effect of environmental taxes in 71 developing countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Oops, I was supposed to put there the dates. Sorry for that. So again, the question was, which countries have taxes and which are the ones that are treated? I think that would be really illustrative, because as we can see here, there are not a lot of developing countries that have taxes, and not only that, the taxes in these countries tend to be really low. So I would love to know a little bit more about that. He employs a panel data analysis to assess the relationship between environmental taxes, carbon emissions, and real GDP per capita, control for factors that might influence these variables, such as geographic effects, trade openness, labor force, and capital stock, and use the product role, as he also already mentioned, to estimate indirect effects of environmental taxes on real GDP per capita mediated by carbon emissions. And the study finds the environmental taxes have a positive and statistical significant direct effect on real GDP per capita and lead to decrease in carbon dioxide emissions. So he finds a double dividends. And the study suggests that Asian region might benefit more than the Latin American and Sub-Saharan Africa, potentially due to the difference in distribution systems and institutions. So some of my suggestions is he used the lags of the emissions as instruments. I am a little concerned about some indigeneity, so I will suggest if he explores using price of energy as an instrument for explaining the impact of taxes on growth. And then the other thing that I would love to see is that he controls for energy consumption. I think that would be really, really, really important. I mean, it could, for me, will strengthen and check some of the indirect effects that he's trying to capture. And then I would love to explore further. He says in his paper, quoting, the effectiveness of environmental tax in stimulating welfare depends on the redistribution policies, the use of environmental tax revenue, and the quality of political and economic institutions. If he has any indicators for some of these values and so on, try to understand more what is driving his results, it would be amazing, more like the mechanisms and so on. So yeah, I mean, it was short, but hopefully useful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Luis. So I think most of them were, comments were taken, which I will look into. So I think the one question you asked had to do with which countries, have these carbon, taxes. I think I missed, so the data on the tax that we use is actually the environmental tax revenue, as a share of the country's GDP. And it doesn't really show specifically in terms of what component of environmental tax that you are actually dealing with. But I do agree with you that, I mean, it will be more interesting to delve into the specifics, because, I mean, if you just say environmental tax, that's a more general, definition of that concept. I don't know if but I mean, as you know, in most developing countries, we don't have a lot of countries that have, actually instituted carbon tax, I mean, yet. I mean, maybe in Asia, we see, I mean, a lot of that. Maybe some of the countries, maybe also Latin America. But when it comes to, I mean, Africa, you can talk of few, I mean, countries that have instituted such, I mean, tax. Okay. And I'm sure once I consider carbon tax, it will reduce the sample significantly, because then, but because I use environmental tax, that probably explain why I got the 71, I mean, developing countries.
Yeah, thank you very much, Philip. I don't think I see more questions in the chat, so please, if you have additional questions for Philip, please post them in the chat here. Maybe, yeah, also following up on Louis' comment, I was also asking myself whether you have like additional information on the type of tax that you have in the different countries. I understand now from your comment that it's not only carbon taxes, but also other environmental taxes. But then Luis was hinting towards the level of the carbon tax, which is super crucial for assessing effectiveness in reducing emissions, but then also regarding the impacts on growth. But then also many countries do have carbon taxes, but only for specific sectors. So if you could also include, I don't know, like the share of emissions that is under carbon tax regime, I think that would be interesting to learn a bit more about the type of carbon taxes that you analyze in your sample.
Yes, totally agree with you on that point. Yeah.
Right, okay. I don't think we have more comments here on your paper. So please give a warm round of applause for Philip for your presentation and the discussion. And then we are going to switch to our last presentation today. So Luis, please, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much. I will start screen sharing, and yeah. So I'm presenting a paper that is joint work with, I hate that the bar is here, sorry, I'm going to move it for me. So again, sorry, I'm going to present this paper that is joint work with Brigitte, who is also in the call. She presented early today in one of the shorter presentations, and with Rafael Gefron and Mingo Hyun. And the title is A Global and Inclusive Just Labor Transition, Challenges and Opportunities in Developing and Developed Countries. So yeah. I mean, this is more a theoretical paper, or more than a theoretical, is more a conceptual paper. So it's less focused on the mechanisms, or no, sorry, less focused on methods, but more qualitative analysis of. We did case studies of 7 countries. So this is the roadmap of today's presentation. I will start defining what is a just labor transition, then what are the challenges for labor markets in the energy transition, and the lessons from previous transitions. And in particular, I will be focusing in the case of trade, and then how does energy transition differ from other transitions. Then I will jump to the case studies that we did. So we analyzed 7 developed countries and 7 developing countries. And then I will present a tool that we are developing. It's still work in progress, so all suggestions will be needed. Currently, it's qualitative. We're trying to include more quantitative assessment. And then I go ahead to conclude. So What does the term just transition mean? We have had a whole seminar right now about just transition and a lot of presentations all around, and it means a lot of things for different people. Energy poverty and energy security, protect from increasing energy costs for low-income groups, equitable distribution of benefits and risks from the clean energy transition, and then financing the energy transition from global north to global south. That hasn't been that topic, but like there's the JTPs and ETAs. If you go to COP or you open the newspapers, and COP, when they talk about just transition, they're talking about how funding is going to flow from the global north to the global south. But originally, this term, the just transition term, came from the unions in the US. And when they were having a transition in terms of energy transition and so on in the 70s and 80s, and then it was taken, I mean, in different contexts. Then it was in the COP of Poland, they bring it to this context, and now it's used for all these different topics. But in particular, this paper is focusing on the labor effects of the green transition. So this is a definition that we're trying to create that is that encompass what we believe is to be a just labor transition. It is a process that ensures an equitable shift to a low emissions economy by prioritizing decent work opportunities while protecting workers and communities' rights and well-being. It involves proactive planning, inclusive decision-making, policy interventions, and ongoing monitoring to promote economic resilience and social equity throughout the needed energy transition. So I throw a lot of concepts here, but in some sense is we believe that like the just labor transition has to take care of workers and at the same time protecting the communities and workers that will be affected. And then it has to be, when we say proactive planning, it has to be together governments and affected stakeholders, and it has to be inclusive in the sense that it includes like the affected communities into the policy decisions and so on. So it reminds me one of the presentations from yesterday that is really important to actually to be successful, because if not, you have the blockades that we're talking about Colombia in one of the sessions yesterday and so on. So let me continue. So what are the challenges for a labor market in the low emission transition? Here I have a quote from Tercia and Fouquet that says, achieving net zero emissions by 2050 requires a complete overhaul of the energy, transportation, housing, agricultural, manufacturing, and moral within just 3 decades. So we have 25 years if we want to get to net zero by 2050. 25 years is not a long time. And obviously there's countries, developing countries have a lag relative to developed countries, but at the same time, they haven't polluted as much. So, but what are these main challenges? The workforce vulnerability in high carbon sectors. We know miners are going to be affected. We know like power plant operators and people working in energy intensive industries are going to be affected. And in particular, one of the big issues with fossil fuels and the mining and so on is that there gives a high geographic concentration of the affected workers. And it is even stronger when you think about coal, and you have like really enclaves of regions in different countries where basically the whole economy depends on coal, or even coal and gas, but more stronger in coal. So that's a big challenge. Then we know about the general equilibrium effects of the energy transition. It affects entire local economies that are heavily reliant on fossil fuel extraction, not just specific job types within industry. So, I mean, we know that jobs could be direct, the ones that are working there, and direct, the transportation or the other things that are relative to that, and then also the induced jobs that could be affected, and that is a big shock for the economy. And then obviously it's going to affect the service sector, the supply chain, and so on. And in particular, when we're focusing in this seminar is on global south, on developing countries, informal sector considerations is really key to understand how to ensure a just transition. And the big issue is that there are a lot of workers that lack of social security, and we know that there's a lot of issues with measurement and data collection and actually understanding how many workers are affected and so on. So that's something that we have to consider. Then there's a lack of infrastructure that we have to fill. And then the new green jobs that are appearing and that are really seem to be really good, there's a lot of concerns that there's a skill mismatch and labor shortages to fill this type of new jobs. So those are some of the challenges. And then let's go back a little bit in time and say, what are the lessons that we can learn from previous transitions? In particular, I want to take the case of trade. So Gordon Hanson and David Autor and co-authors, they have documented really well the China shock. And in a paper from Gordon Hanson about this energy transition, he says that basically we have to have a top of mind in this discussion to avoid repeating the painful adjustments of globalization and atomization, which in recent decades brought concentrated job loss and long-lasting economic distress to labor markets and specialized in manufacturing. So in some sense, I mean, there's new papers. There was already the big paper from Autor and Hanson and et al. that found that the trade pulls labor markets in the US experience higher unemployment, lower wages, and growth imports from China. But now, moreover, there are new papers that are following on that, and the scarring effects of these have been enormous. So not only it was affected at that point in time, but has like long-lasting effects and impacts on communities that were affected. And then, in particular, in global South context, the liberalization of trade in developing countries had various effects, and depending on the accumulation of human capital and natural resources and how they react to the opening of the markets. East Asia was a really a great case in some sense. They prepared themselves, they didn't open too fast, and they tried to prioritize education and training policies, and they end up having a big growth spur after the trade liberalization. And then Latin American countries initially faced a lot of educational disparities and resulted in large periods of skilled labor supply adjustments. And in particular, for example, Mexico entered with NAFTA, and it was like a big shock, and the differences between Mexico and Canada were enormous. So that affected a lot the industries. And what happens is like only the really low skilled jobs were the ones that were being generated in Mexico or in other Latin American countries. And then also some countries like Colombia, like Argentina, like Chile, that were really energy and natural resources abundant, they focus on exporting these primary goods, which again, we know that in development, it gives a lag of development relative to more advanced economies. So how does this energy transition differ from other transitions? Unlike past transitions, often driven by market forces, the energy transition is driven by the long-term policy strategies to address climate change. So this is a big opportunity. We know that previously there was a China shock, or there was like automatization, a new machine, something changed completely, and it was like not unannounced, and that affected a lot, and we couldn't prepare ourselves. Here, we know that this is a planned transition, and we have to take advantage of that. And then, I mean, Europe has been doing it a little bit like longer term, and they have it has been taking too long, but nonetheless, they have been doing it for a long time, and they're doing a lot of planning. I think I want to encourage like developing countries to do it more, and has a broader reach than other transitions because energy is a significant input in all production, and basically it involves a fundamental shift of how we produce and consume energy. And then there's a big climate change risk, which is global and has long-term impacts. So growth and everything will be affected if we don't stop climate change. And then fossil fuels are a global commodity that have a lot of investment and lobbying power. So that's basically one of the big issues that is stopping the transition is that, and we have to convince workers and affected communities to support the climate actions instead of the firms and that they work for, which is difficult because they are the providers of their livelihoods and so on. And the energy transition requires exploiting other minerals that might replicate poor mining practices, such as not guaranteeing working rights. We know critical minerals and so on. There's a big concern from Global South that the Global North will come and exploit the minerals that are needed, and then they will increase the inequalities instead of helping the local communities and so on. So that's what makes this transition different. I want to show this map, which is really sad, but nonetheless important. Like most of the jobs that are being created in renewable energies are, China obviously is like is enormous. But then Europe and US are the ones that are like producing most of these jobs. And then what is more striking, if you see, except for I mean, basically all the countries that are fossil fuel dependent, they don't are producing enough jobs in renewable energy. And there is a comparative advantage of the countries that are not necessarily fossil fuels. So we have to think about what are the options that these countries could have to take advantage of this window of opportunity for development. So this is not my graph. This is from EfD-Chile. It's a recent book that I recommend. Really, it's about the green industrial transformation, and I really recommend reading it to all of you. So let's go to back to our study. So what are the case studies that we did? So we take 7 developing countries and 7 developing countries and developed countries. So it's the US, Great Britain, Netherlands, Germany, Poland, Australia, and New Zealand, and then Colombia, Argentina, Nigeria, South Africa, India, Indonesia, and Vietnam. So what we can learn from the current or previous energy transitions from developed countries, the effects are different for different countries. They have different affected industries, that I mean the most affected industries, and they have responded differently. So we know Germany tends to be one of the best cases, but at the same time they have thrown a lot of money to solve this issue. But then we know that Australia has had really a lot of backlashes and issues with their transition. They have limited support for workers and communities, and it has been a lot of fighting and here. And then obviously we will I will explore a little bit more these countries when I presented the tool that we're trying to like that we're developing. But yeah, I mean, it's just like a big overview of these 7 countries. In the US, we know that, I mean, there was a lot of job losses, economic decline, and there's different policies that have been implemented. In particular, the US is as many of these countries, but in particular, US is such a big country that you could subdivide it by states and so on. But yeah, let me continue. What are the lessons that we can learn? I don't know if you're seeing my bar or not, but I will take it off. Yeah, sorry. The lessons from and challenges in developing countries. We need a robust leadership and funding. Central governments need to provide a clear vision and direction and resources. So here's the planning. Local collaboration is key. As I said, we have to have extensive consultations, inclusive participation, and effective networks. Here is really important. There's a lot of examples where governments try to do industrial policies or try to do some sort of policies that they believe that would be useful to solve, and they do models and everything, but then once they try to implement it, communities are not happy with them, they stop this, and at the end it's only throwing money to nowhere and not solving this issue. At the same time, we have to focus on multi-tier governments and support. I mean, this has to come from basically the planning perhaps should come from the central government, but then we have to go to states or to municipalities and so on. And it has to be, as I said, it's a shared responsibility between firms and workers. Then we have to evaluate and social support and regulations, see what works and what's not. The example of Germany, like early retirement at the beginning, was like a big policy and was like a lot of support, but now there has been a lot of ex post analysis where they show that people weren't as happy with early retirement. There were concerns that they wanted to have that work makes them feel productive and that they want to be a still part of the productive economy and so on. So in some sense, we have to be careful and reevaluate if it's the best way to solve it. I mean, and it's a pretty expensive policy. And then economic diversification beyond clean energy. This is really important. We know that with all the changes that is happening in the world with automatization, with AI and everything, there's a lot of new jobs and opportunities. And there also like the care economy is going to be a big issue, and it's really labor intensive. There's nothing that that changes caring for people. So there's a lot of options there outside of only the renewable economy. Then here's we try to do like a snapshot of how is the developing countries statistics in labor markets and so on. What is the source in transition? I mean, we have some countries that are basically oil, some coal, and some that has both, like Colombia. These represent a relative big share of sector GDP and the sector of a percentage of GDP. And the big issue is not only the total GDP, but also for most of these countries represents a lot of the revenue for governments. So it is a big chunk of the GDP, but on top of that, the royalties that they receive is important. So, and then there's a lot of workers working in directly in these industries and in direct jobs. And here we couldn't account for induced jobs, but I mean, it could be even bigger, sure. And then in all these countries, they have a big portion of informality. Obviously, when you have a little bit more development, the informality decreases, and less development, it increases. But it's a huge concern that we have. And then here we mention different the fossil fuel mix on their matrix, and the fossil electricity, what is the share, and so on. And then we also put here, we wanted to show like critical minerals as a possibility, as an outside option, obviously taking care of not repeating the bad practices of the past. But all of these countries had at least an advantage in one of these really rare or critical minerals. And obviously the skills needed all tend to be more high, while the skills in coal tend to be low. And most of these countries already have some unionization, and then the informal workers are not covered here. So there's again a big, and the social protection that exists in these countries is relatively low, and it's a big concern. So it could be an opportunity to change some of the things. Let me go. Yeah. So what are the tools, policies, and strategies to advance the just transition that we identified? So we divided like worker support, like trying to think of the supply of labor, is like retraining, reskilling, and upskilling programs. Other active labor market policies like job search assistance, wage subsidies, and so on. Social protection, which is here one of the issues is like that if you have informalities, they don't receive it, but like unemployment insurance, early retirement, pension plans, income support. Here could be also universal basic income or things like that have been. And obviously, if most of the jobs that are created, especially, for example, in India, the new jobs that are going to be created, the new renewable jobs are not going to be in the east part where it's the coal, but in the west, in the east part where it's the coal, but in the west part. So there could be some assistance if workers want to move to better locations. Other things that we have to explore and understand are what are the best regional development strategies and place-based policies, including industrial policies, helping SMEs and entrepreneurship incentives, and so on. And adding community engagement here is key. And then something that many times happen is like federal governments have this big plan, they come, they give money, they go away. So it's important to maintain, monitor, and evaluation of the policies to know if they're working and if you have to change it, and so on. And then there's thinking of when should be the optimal timing. So it's like pollute now and clean later, or start cleaning right now. I mean, the previous presentation will say that even developing countries will benefit of cleaning right now. But I mean, in some sense, because of political support and things like that, we think that developed countries have to be doing it right now, and a lot of them are already doing it. And developing countries are still, they have to start planning today. I mean, trying to convince and talk to industries and so on to decrease their. I talk too much. I have 1 minute. So this is the progress scale. We try to rank countries based on the analysis that we did of each of the countries, from beginner to peak, depending on how things that they have incorporated. So Colombia and Argentina have a moderate, so they have a lot of planning already ongoing, but they haven't a lot of implementation. India is starting a lot of discussions, but nothing still written. Then the same case, I mean, the best case for developing countries that we identify is Vietnam. They have implemented, I mean, they have a lot of laws, and then on top of that, they have implemented a lot of them, and they're having a lot of success. And then Similarly, here we can see like Germany and United Kingdom are the most advanced countries from our sample. And yeah, the thing that I wanted to show is currently it was based on qualitative results based on what I mean, number of laws or things like that. But we want to add a little bit more quantitative to evaluate the just labor transition. So, for example, the number of green jobs created, the percentage of workforce undergoing reskilling and upskilling programs, rate of declining jobs, unemployment rate in transition regions, and how it's changing through time, investment in social safety nets, level of work participation, and JT policy development. So we define what is a just labor transition. We analyze 7 developed countries and 7 developed countries. We identify tools and policies that might lead to a just labor transition, and we propose this new tool to see the progress of the different countries. Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Okay, thank you, Luis. That was very fast, the last slides. Thank you very much. And we have Philip providing some comments. And to the rest of you, please feel free to add, to comment and ask questions in the chat, please.
Okay, Luis, thank you very much for such a wonderful and insightful. I mean, I must confess, I actually enjoy reading the paper, even though because I'm a more quantitative person, most cases I love to see numbers, but I actually followed the discussion and I enjoyed the lines of argument. Let me start on a more minor issue. So, you know, when I saw the topic, just the topic, before even reading, you know, the first thing that I asked myself, I mean, this is energy environment, you know, conference. I mean, what is the connection there? So, I mean, it took me to read the abstract, you know, and the main text to see that the attempt is to look at how such, you know, energy transition is impacting on, you know, labor, you know, outcomes. So I think rightly in your presentation, you did answer that question to say that the focus is to look at the labor transition effect of, you know, green transition or something, I mean, like that. So maybe you may want to, I mean, look at that. The other issue was on the case studies, I mean, presented. Maybe let me start with the lighter one. I mean, I was surprised not to see China. Was there any reason why China was not considered? Knowing well, even with the graph the diagram, the map that you showed, that, you know, significant transition has actually occurred in that part of the world. Was there any reason why? Okay, so, and then when I was looking at the specific case studies, the stories that you actually, you know, I mean, portrayed, you realize that, you know, in some contexts we're looking at, you know, transition from coal. In other contexts, we are looking at, you know, transition within the mining sector, in others from the oil and gas. I mean, these are, I mean, obviously different, I mean, sectors, and when you want to talk about its implications on the labor dynamics, I'm sure the stories are quite likely to be very different. So when you try to draw, you know, some lessons from such a pool, which seems to kind of generalize, I find it a bit, in terms of, I mean, if we were to think of strategies, the applicability of that, you know, across all sectors. So that is one thing that I also noticed. And then, I mean, you know, in most, I mean, cases, when we are looking at such energy transition, and particularly in your context, the implications on labor, we seem to forget, particularly for developing country context. We know that biomass is one, significant, energy source, and there's a whole global push away from such, fuel source to other source. I mean, do you think this issue of just, transition and how it, because I mean, there are people also working in that sector. I mean, and if we are moving from, biomass energy to say LPG, I mean, and all other, I mean, are these concerns also, relevant, and should we be talking, about that? Yes, I think, and then maybe my last point is, like in your paper, clearly you indicated what constitutes or the different dimensions of, just a labor transition. And as I was reading the paper, I mean, I was asking, myself, so what aspects, for example, when you take the developing country context, and you compare that to the developed context, I mean, what aspect of this just transition, pop up as, a major issue? I mean, do we see some kind of, a trend? Is it more of people just losing jobs, or, finding it difficult to match, jobs and I mean, and so on and so forth? And there was an important point, particularly on the financing of such transition. I think in your recommendation, you did advocate that, I mean, states should be involved. I mean, but I mean, politically, do you think that is something that will sell, knowing that already the national budget is already overburdened, and we are looking at ways to, bring in other, entities, to fund such, I mean, transition. So thank you for your presentation.
Can I respond? So about in our paper, we take the stance that we need the environmental transition, the green transition, the energy transition, and that we need to, I mean, in some sense, we're taking that as given, and then we focus on how we minimize the impact for labor markets. So that's basically where the relationship between environment and our paper is. So then China, it was, I mean, it was a difficult decision to take some countries and not all, but China has a lot of different things that the other countries. I mean, obviously, at some point we can add it. At some we will love to have a dashboard where we will have the tool and that you can choose like the country and how advanced they are, what policies they have done, and so on. But China has a lot of direct policies, of control, and we know that they have different. They don't have a democratic regimen, so it could have, I don't know, the external validity could be important there to consider of the learnings, the cross learnings. But obviously, I mean, adding it will enrich our discussion. Then you mentioned that there, I mean, at the end, even though there are different industries, you mentioned that we have coal, we have some oil and gas, and so on. I think even though there are different industries and they will have different trends, that's why there are some policies that could be more focalized and they would be more targeted to some particular sector. But other, I mean, in some sense, labor markets at the end is providing you are the supplier of your time and your human capital to the economy. So in some sense, I think we can understand. I mean, obviously there are high skill versus low skill, and we know that, and the type of policies that you will need are different to different. But in some sense, we are thinking of transitioning workers not only from the current energy fossil fuel intensive industries to clean energies, but mostly, at least the data shows that they move to neutral jobs and services and so on. So in some sense, analyzing them together, I think it makes sense. Then the biomass and energy as an energy source is something we haven't not explored. We focusing more on the electricity or like the production of fossil fuels in general, but the effects of biomass that's a negative for houses and so on, and how big are the sectors we didn't take into account, and I have noted it, and I will really explore that. I think that's a very good suggestion. And then you mentioned what are the trends that we identified? One of the things is that we identified a lot is like a lot of the new jobs that could be created or that are expected to be created are not in the same places. I mean, I talked about the of the enclaves and about the fact that regions or coal regions are in a part of the country, but the new jobs where are more efficient tends to be in another part of the country. So that's relevant because you don't want to leave left behind like a full area. And for example, in the US, they're doing this in the IRA, in the Inflation Reduction Act, they're doing they're giving more incentives if you locate your new production in energy communities, and that's something that is being replicated also in Europe and in other places. So in some sense, having place-based policies could be a way to ameliorate these effects in these communities. And yeah, I mean, political will and things like that, I think this is a big issue, but I will not try to avoid talking today, but thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. We have one additional comment in the chat. Rishabh asking or saying, I agree that understanding the informal sector is crucial to guiding a just path in many of these countries. Do you have any idea of how developing countries are trying to engage with the informal sector and how policy can try to fill the gaps in who's being reached by social welfare programs?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big issue, and we have been discussing it. I have been reaching out to policymakers and people from different countries, and many times, like if you go and search in ILO's Just Transition handbook, you don't find informal, or you find it like mentioned 2 or 3 times in the whole document. And if you go all over in any places that they're discussing, like the JTPs, they tend to ignore the informal labor market because it's difficult to take it into account. I talked to some people in India, in particular, for example, and they were telling me that one of the big issues with the informal sector is that I mean, some of these policies are coming from state level policies, while like informality will be more like social protection that will come from the from the federal government. So there's a lack of understanding, and that's why I believe that we need the multi-tiered and coordination between the different levels of government. And I mean, that's what we believe is like in rich countries, they can do more targeted policies and take care more of some particular industries, but in developing countries, they could take this as an opportunity to broaden their social protection and their social welfare programs, and to I mean, but at the same time, this is a matter of costs, no? Because I mean, governments have a limited budget, so understanding where to put their money and where it's more efficient. So a lot of work in this area is needed to analyze which policies are more effective. Like there's a lot of criticism for example, reskilling and trying to help like workers prepare, even the informal workers to get into the green jobs. But I mean, we have to be sure that we're choosing the more effective, cost-effective programs, or at least that are minimizing the welfare impacts.
Right. Okay. I think there are no more questions here in the chat. So let's give a round of applause to Luis and for the discussion and the presentation. And I think with that, we are already finished with our session. I think the other sessions should still be in progress because they had 5 presentations. So if you feel like joining one of the other sessions, I think they will be happy to receive you as laced guests. If not, thank you very much for participating in today's session in the SETI conference. And yeah, I hope to see you soon again, virtually or in person, even better. So thanks for everybody, and have a nice afternoon or evening or day wherever you are based.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Maxi.
Thank you so much.